My name is Alison Paprica, and I think you got my bio as part of your event materials. I have to commend the people who organized this because they're so organized. They locked me in last September, and then after that I got a job at the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence, so I'm extremely busy. However, I am so, I feel like you're my people. The fact that you want to attend a workshop on how to run effective meetings, I felt like I still had to come and do this with you today. Because I am a big fan of meetings, because I see them in the following way. There's this thing, and it costs almost nothing, and it is less time consuming and less costly than the alternatives, and it is the best possible way that you can bring together and benefit from the diverse expertise of the people on your team. And all of this, almost for free. And what is it? It is meetings. And that's my daughter in the Bolivian salt flats in Bolivia, and clearly very happy. And truly, done well, these things can make or break multi-million-dollar initiatives, and there's no reason that they can't be done well, and the hope is that this workshop will help with that. So by the end of the workshop, our hope is that everyone's going to understand the different needs and perspectives that meeting participants can bring, before they enter the meeting even. Be able to design agendas that maximize the impact of that time spent together, because it's rare. And even though, notwithstanding it's not very expensive compared to other things that you do, we work with people who are paid well, so that time does have a value. We want to make the most of it. And then finally, there'll be some practice and some tools and techniques and tricks and tips about how to chair and conduct effective meetings. This was material that was circulated in advance. The first part, our increasingly research and innovation are team endeavors, and often bringing together people from diverse perspectives, geographies, disciplines, language, you name it. Meeting effectiveness can literally make or break the success of initiatives, so the need for productive meetings has never been greater. What we're going to do today in 3 parts is we're going to begin with a simulated meeting exercise, first one large group, then in small groups with some tips and tricks in between. Then a bit of seminar style presentation on different types of meetings and tools and techniques that'll help with them. And knowing who this crowd is, we've worked in some text on governance, which people in the previous session found helpful. And one of those techniques is facilitation. And we're actually going to end with a sort of mini facilitation process that makes use of that Poll Everywhere software that was on the screen when we came in. Yes? Yes, the slides will be available. Yeah. So to start, I'm going to ask for one really brave volunteer, because this is going to be, not pretty. So who's feeling brave? I'm making eye contact. That's enough for me. Would you be willing to come up and chair a 5-minute meeting? Okay, thank you. Uh-oh, now I'm looking. Oh, I hope I didn't leave it in the other room. Uh-oh, because this one's being taped. So, do I have them here? Shoot, this is actually a problem. Can I ask you just to go there for a minute? Okay, and then I need 5 other volunteers who are going to play the following roles, unbeknownst to our chair. Who's willing to be someone who's interviewing for a position at another organization? Come on up, it's fun, it'll only be 5 minutes. Yes, excellent, thank you. Second volunteer, thank you. Third volunteer, wants to hijack the meeting, come on. Excellent, hijacker. Someone who has no hidden agenda whatsoever, okay, come on up. And someone who has a long-standing conflict with participant number 1, your participant number 1. So anything participant number 1 says you're going to disagree with. Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, shoot, he just lived. Yeah, number 4. And I realize with mic on, I've probably given this all away, so this will not work as intended. But anyway, let's bring our chair back in. So this is the role you're playing in a brief simulated meeting exercise. It means that you're leaving the organization. So you don't care what happens. You're at the meeting, but you don't, yeah. Okay, so this will not go as intended because I left my pieces of paper in the other room, but still, let's bring the chair back in and see how it goes. Oh, it might work. He left. Great. Okay, thank you so much. What's your name?
Richard.
Richard, thank you so much for agreeing to chair this mini. Oh, I'm moving around too much.
I just said for the other people.
Okay, great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I got two.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Richard, thank you so much for agreeing to chair this mini simulated meeting. The decision that we need to make is hockey or curling.
Okay.
Has to be one or the other, no hybrids.
Mm-hmm.
And you have 5 minutes to chair this meeting and come to this decision.
Okay. So welcome everyone. We have a decision to make on do we like hockey or curling better? Okay, we got about 5 minutes to make a decision on this. So I'd like to get everybody's input on that and what their opinions are. So I'd like to start with giving everybody an opportunity to give their opinion, and then we'll try and discuss it at the end. So would you want to start?
Yeah, well, I don't really care, but shouldn't it be something totally different, like going out for dinner or something? Because I don't think that that everyone will like playing sports, so maybe it's not a good idea at all.
Okay, so maybe we should get back to that at the end of the discussion, and then we'll give the next person the opportunity to give their opinion.
Sorry, what were you wanting us to do? Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. Could you just sorry.
I didn't say in the beginning that we probably all should shut off our phones and close our laptops, but I would like to set that as an expectation that at our meeting, everybody's going to be trying to be focused. And
Yeah,
we'll
I have a family emergency. I know
Okay.
that for most meetings that works, but it's not going to work for me
Okay,
today.
but why don't you then give the next person
Oh.
opportunity? You step outside
Yeah,
for a
sure.
second to deal with your family.
I like sports though.
Okay, so why don't you step outside for a second to deal with the family emergency, and then you can come back. No, but I don't want to spend time on that. So we're going to go to the next person then, please.
I do not agree with the idea to have another, to do something else than sports. I really think it has to be hockey or curling and not something else like eating or things like that.
Okay, so can you give us your opinion then on what you prefer?
I prefer the curling then.
The curling?
Yeah.
And can you explain why for the other people?
Yeah, I just think it's a new kind of sport, so everybody can join and do things, do that. And with hockey, it's already established, so I think it's good to have to do curling so that you have new ideas.
Okay, we'll come back to comments at the end, but I would like to give the next person first an opportunity to vent their opinion. Okay. Can we stick with the
No, I am number 4. So
oh, you're number 4.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
sorry.
have an order. Sorry.
So we'll
So
stick with that.
thank you for, I'm coming to this meeting all the time, and why we don't really get first an agenda, and because we can have some thought about these questions, because I really don't know why you have picked up hockey or curling. What was the rationale? And I have some idea about other sports. So maybe next time you can send up some material in advance, and we have times to think about.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll let my assistant know that we'll we'll work on that next time.
Well, while we're all together, I really want to be able to use the opportunity to talk about workload management.
Okay.
Because I don't think that we actually have enough resources available to us as faculty members to be able to spend time thinking about hockey or curling, when we don't actually have enough resources to do our own jobs.
Okay, so what I noticed by having this like 3-minute meeting with all of you, that we didn't even get to making a decision. So I think that's a bigger issue. So I think before we get to this, we should probably spend some time together on all the issues that you've brought up.
Like workload management.
Yeah. And I think like if you feel like we have to spend more time on that, then we should probably put that on the agenda and spend some extra time on that. Okay, we're going to come back to a comment. Would you mind either doing the family emergency outside of the meeting or be part of the meeting? Yeah, but I asked people.
Okay, I'm going to call this as exasperation. But so a big hand, yeah. And we'll turn this off now. Thank you so much, folks, for volunteering. For those who joined late, and for our chair, most importantly, this is what was going on. So out of the 5 people you had at your meeting, really only one of them was a regular participant. And the rest all had things going on in the background. And the person with the family emergency was open about saying that. But it is interesting, the first interpretation is that it's other work or something that maybe could go by the side. And the point is most meetings are not going to be like this, but most meetings that you call or chair will have participants who have other things going on in their lives. So you really need to be an active chair, and as was suggested by one of the people in that little example, you want to sort of have a plan from the start if you want your meeting to be successful. And so what I'm going to do now, we're going to, yeah, please, yes.
Is it funny that the outcome of this meeting is actually to have another meeting, which happens?
There you go, right? It's like the output of a research study. We need more research. So just briefly, a few tips and tricks that might help with meetings generally in a situation like that. For sure, as noted by one of the participants in the exercise, have an agenda that states specific objectives and purpose and circulate it in advance so people know why they're coming. Identify a strong chair who has multiple roles. Yeah.
What do you people who start looking at the agenda at the minute, like at the start of the meeting?
Yeah.
Like I hate that because I feel like the shorter the meeting, the better, because I feel like we spend way too much time in meetings. So I'm expecting people that I meet with to come prepared. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that and say, well, like if you haven't read it, next time I expect you to be prepared. But like this happens a lot of times where people just walk in and say, well, what are we gonna meet about?
Yeah, so I agree. I think that's we're all on a mission to make it better. We're in this situation where so many of us have so many meetings that there's this ridiculous situation that you're meeting, so you don't have time to prepare for meetings, and you get these awful sort of first blush response, stream of consciousness type get-togethers, which again is such a waste of the valuable time of the people in attendance. So I'll show you later. We're going to have my sort of go-to agenda template that can help with that, but there is no easy solution for that either. I don't want to imply that there is. You do need a strong chair. So for people that have been involved in boards, you probably know that when you go to a board meeting, not much is left to chance, right? You know who's going to propose motions, you know who's going to second them. Most of the time, you know who's going to vote on things. I'm not suggesting you need to do that for your core team meetings, your regular meetings. But you do need someone who's in charge of running that process, who's in charge of ensuring that the objectives are met, if you want everyone to be able to contribute their knowledge to it. It's the role of the chair and an expectation, I think, of most meeting participants that the challenging, disruptive participants are managed in a way. We've probably all been at meetings where the chair doesn't do that. Maybe it's not their natural leadership style. And we are wishing that they did, because it's clear to pretty much everyone in the room that it's not a good use of time to have the person doing that. And so I'll just pause now and see, for the people that were in the challenging type disruptive roles, do you have ideas about how a chair could have managed someone with that behavior? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's an artificial environment, and you had everything was working against you. Yeah. So on that one, I actually think you did exactly the right thing, even without knowing what it was. If someone, if someone's niece, a close family member, is literally, in a life-threatening situation, it's not realistic to think they're going to be in the meeting. They may want to be in the meeting, but to extend an offer to them to say, look, we're compassionate people. There are other things going on. You don't need to have your attention divided. We'll catch you up after. I think that's a good thing to do. Other thoughts about, some people who are in disruptive roles? Who else? Someone wanted to hijack the meeting and talk about workflow. How could that have been managed? If you were the chair, how would you have managed yourself in that moment? Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 So your meeting, a good meeting agenda, maybe can help with that. Having a purpose that everybody believes is worth, working towards together can help, but there's no simple fix for that kind of thing. And one of the things that came up in the last session is maybe you can make conduct at meetings a bit of a performance measure for their professional development in terms of how things are working better. So if, for example, you have a person who tends to dominate meetings, crowding out the voices of others, you might say, for example, in professional development, and I have a friend who does this through Canadian health executives, she gives herself 3 comments at every meeting, unless it's exceptional circumstances. So she sort of uses them wisely. She's like, oh, is this worth one of my comments? Maybe not, because she's someone who otherwise would, contribute a lot. So no silver bullet, but some things that can be helpful. And then finally, on this list, a strong chair is needed so that you have clarity about what was decided and who is responsible for which action item. So you can sort of have discussion, and maybe even it appears to be moving towards consensus, but you need the chair to say, this is what we just decided, right? Right. And then you know what's happened. And this is the person who's going to lead on it. One tip that you might use, and we'll talk more about this as we go into some of the details, but generally I'm an advocate for what I call putting more notches on the dial, moving things out of binary sort of yes-no decisions and giving yourself more freedom to interact with each other, again, so you can get the benefit from the diverse perspectives. So a simple trick that you can use if you think you're not sure where you are in terms of consensus, it's called the 5-finger method. And you can imagine it this way, a fist means 0, like I am fighting against this, it's not going to happen. And 5 is like, I am fully on board, I want this to happen tomorrow kind of thing. And then just the spaces in between or whatever they mean to you. So instead of sort of immediately going into this binary mode of I'm for, I'm against, you can gauge the group to see where people are, how far people might need to move to get to the point that they've got consensus, and distinguish between maybe a situation where almost everyone's a 3, 4, or 5, or you've got 2 or 3 fists in the room. So with that, what I want us to do next is we're going to break into small groups, and we've got another sort of smaller simulated meeting. And so I'm going to be looking for, I'm going to say 4 people who would volunteer to chair in these small groups. Would people stand up if we've got 4 volunteers? Would you be willing to chair another one like this, but just in a small group? Oh, come on. Last time I had a surplus of volunteers. You would? Thank you very much. So you'll be a chair now. So 3 other people who would chair. Great, thank you. A chair, thank you. And 1 more person. Thank you very much. Okay, so if people could organize around the chairs in sort of groups of 4 or 5. So we're going to do a modified version here because I think some of my tools are still in the other room. Everyone, think of a number. Think of a number between 1 to 10. Okay, not the chair. Everyone but the chair, think of a number between 1 to 10. Okay, and everyone that thought of a number 7 or higher, you're going to assume some disruptive role of some kind or some non-supportive role. And don't tell people what it is. You're going to tell people after. But just whatever the chair is trying to do, you're not going to be as supportive as the chair would like. Oh, then don't worry. Then you're definitely just going to exasperation. Or not. Maybe you got some. Okay, so everyone knows who the chair is. They know whether they're in a supportive role or not. Okay, so here's your decision. Sorbet with fruit or molten chocolate cake. No fusion desserts. You have to choose one or the other. We're going to work for about 5 minutes or until done or until exasperation, and then we'll divulge what our non-supportive roles were. Yeah, so let's come back to that because there are some specific techniques that you can do. I mean, generally, you're always trying for consensus, but when you've got diverse participants, you may not get it. And so then the question is exactly what do you do? And sort of bullying manipulation can be one thing, and there can be other alternatives. Anybody else have anything they just want to share before we move more into the seminar style experience to date? That sort of, I mean, it's an artificial, but do you find yourself in that kind of situation in meetings? Yeah. Every day? Yeah. Okay, the Grinch. Yeah, we heard that comment up here too, that it was hard to be the contrary person. Yeah. But you know what I would say to that is that's something to work on too, because again, one of my things is something should be different at the end of the meeting than it was going in. Otherwise, why are you meeting? And the way it becomes different and better is through different opinions coming in. And sometimes the reason you don't get consensus is because there's really a better way to go. So you don't want to move too quickly into, you know, just majority rules or anything like that. As time allows, and sometimes there isn't much time, but as time allows, you want to explore where those different views are coming from and how they might strengthen what it is that you're working on. Okay, so I'm going to move now into seminar style presentation on types of meetings and tools for them. And it's just kind of a whole melange, to tell you the truth. You know, some we'll just touch on, others we'll spend more time talking about. And the slides are going to be available, so people are free to take notes, but those will follow up after. So not a definitive list, but some key meetings I thought people should be aware of are kickoff meeting, the thing you do at the very start of initiative. You're going to hear me say huge return on investment. Core team meetings, these are the people that work on the project all the time. These are the most frequent meetings. They tend to be more detailed than other ones. Advisory committee meetings or steering committee meetings. This is how you get external advice and governance bodies coming into your research and projects. Stakeholder consultation meetings. You're going out to a group who may not be as familiar with your topic as you are, and you're often trying to have people come together so that you can, you know, extract key themes from them. And then project closeout meeting when your initiative's done. You know, how do you get lessons learned and capture them so that you can use them in future work? And some tools that we'll go through. A structured agenda. I'm going to show you my go-to agenda and we'll spend some time on it. Define decision-making processes. These are key. You know, you will have times when you don't get to consensus. And so then the question is, how do you find a way forward? And just generally, it's going to be much less contentious if you state up front how that process is going to work than if you sort of make it up in the moment. Terms of reference for committees outlining, you know, their role, their authority, things like quorum, etc. Marked up agenda as an alternative to minutes. You'll hear me say I absolutely hate minutes. I think they're one of the biggest time wasters we've got. And then facilitation techniques at the end. So as I said, sort of all mixed together, but coming together in a way that's hopeful, I trust. So the kickoff meeting, one of the single biggest things you can do for your project, great return on investment. Because this is, if nothing else, this is how you formally start the project. We've probably all been in situations, you know, a grant is submitted, you get the good news, and then maybe you don't have, you know, a postdoc yet or whatever it is. And it can actually be hard to know, like, is this active or is this not active? And not just that, you've got a great opportunity to energize the project at the start. So calling a meeting with a defined agenda to formally start the project, introduce the lead and help build their authority, have them be recognized as an authority, establish a common understanding of what you're going to do, what the project's going to produce. You can say things like, you know, imagine we're at the end of this, what will we point to know that we're successful? Ensure that everybody knows about important dates and constraints that affect the project. Make people aware of key opportunities and a little bit on risk, but I would say, you know, on your kickoff meeting, the whole point is you want it to be energizing, so you're not deep into the weeds. This is just sort of the high level thing to orient people. And then finally, ideally you want to have this in person because you're starting something together. We all know that communication is mostly not verbal. This is the opportunity to begin to build relationships that then can be sustained more easily by other mechanisms, but there's really no substitute for that in person. So this would be one type of meeting. Probably the most common meeting that you're going to have for your study, research project initiative, whatever it is what I call the core team meetings. And one of the questions that came up in the other workshop is, you know, my meeting gets really big. Like, what are you talking about, 7 to 10 people? We have 25, 30 people. And I would say that's a sign that those people need other ways of getting information from you. Because there are actually studies that show you're much more likely to be successful if you can get to the point that you've got those 7 to 10 people who are working on the project all the time. And by that, I would mean, you know, at least every couple of weeks and more usually daily. And the core team, they're the ones who keep the project going. They're the ones who do the work. Other people come in and out and have important inputs, but the core team's really the heart of it. And it would have on it, you know, the project lead, principal investigator, coordinator, people that are responsible for specific deliverables and elements of the project, people that are responsible for sub-deliverables, and then people who aren't the lead for anything but just do the work. So this is, you know, your core group. People might say, well, really I have 14 or 21 people like that. And actually studies have also shown that the single biggest thing you can do to have success at that point is to divide it into sub-projects. Because it's just the scheduling, the everything, the communication, it's so much harder when you get beyond that sort of magic number of 7 to 10. Core team meetings are going to be the most frequent, e.g. weekly or bi-weekly. Some people, like in IT, they'll even have them daily, like a touch point at 8 a.m. I find for most of the research studies that I'm involved in, we don't actually move at that pace. That's not a good use of time. But certainly weekly, bi-weekly, and at least monthly, I would say, again, if this is going to be the engine that's fueling the project. So I'm going to show you now whether it's a kickoff meeting. Well, actually, this would be more sort of like a regular core team meeting. But this is the agenda that I've now used for I don't know how many years. And I found it to be really effective. And, you know, if it works for you, please feel free to go with it as well. Welcome and review of main meeting objectives by the chair. And typically for a meeting, if we're talking, you know, not like a 2-day research meeting, but say it's like an hour to a 2-hour meeting, you want to have 2 objectives. Maybe you can squeeze in 3, but 2 is often a good amount of time. Because if you're really, again, if you're trying to have things that change based on the discussion at the meeting, you shouldn't be planning to have that happen 4 or 5 times. That would be a lot, and people won't be as fresh by the end of it. The section 2 I have there is optional brief review of select key accomplishments. It really depends on how your team functions. A lot of times people come together at meetings because there's some issue that you need to work through together, right? So it can be the case that meetings kind of take on a bit of a negative tone. So if your team has discipline and they can just briefly go through like 5 sentences about this was great and this was great, then it's a really good way to start the meeting on a positive note that's energizing. If, on the other hand, you have a team that's highly analytic and starts asking questions about these things, this can totally backfire because you may find yourself, you know, 20 or 25 minutes into the meeting on this thing that was supposed to only take 5 minutes. So this would be a judgment call. You might want to try it to start because it can really work well. And then if it's not working for your team, don't chastise them or anything. Just move it to this other place in the agenda that'll come to soon. On this agenda, and in most of the meetings that I run, you would have 2, maybe 3 discussion, decision, or sometimes FYI items. Like you might have someone come and present to the whole team. And basically what you want to do is in advance, your circulated agenda is going to include quite a bit of detail about what this is. So it wouldn't just say, you know, we're having a summit, for example. It would say, the meeting agenda might say, we are going to decide on the venue and the budget for the summit at this time. It's a decision item we're going to decide. Or alternatively, let's stick on that topic, it might say, we're starting to explore options for the summit. We want to have a preliminary discussion with the whole team to see if there are general preferences that we should take into account. So right away, you're orienting people to know whether, you know, is it refining something that's close to done? Is it a first discussion about something? Is it something where you're hoping to exit the meeting with a decision? And in just a few sentences, present that so everyone comes knowing that's what's going to happen. Someone made the point about like knowing in advance and prep. I can't remember when it came up. This is how I would do it. And less is more. If you can convey it in 3 sentences, perfect. If it turns into a page, there's less likelihood that people will actually have read it. And even if people haven't read it, if it's just 2 or 3 sentences, at least they know beginning at the start of the meeting what they're there for. If you have something that you know is tricky, that maybe you're not sure if you're going to get consensus, put it earlier in the agenda when people are as fresh as possible, because if it comes later, you know, only the most motivated and strong will continue to contribute to it. So 1 discussion decision item, another one, possibly a third, And then this is the key, and I've got a slide about this later. This idea of having FYI and or small decision items. So these would be detailed statements and potentially really small decisions written in a way that people just kind of say, okay or yes, okay, 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 yes. And if there isn't an immediate yes to something, you just move it offline. And in some cases, well, in most cases, you don't even discuss these. You would just say, oh, we're now at the FYI item. Does anyone have any comments or questions on them, as opposed to going through them in order? And this is the perfect place to put things like, you know, we've confirmed a $75,000 budget for the summit, or by the way, this risk came up, but these two people are managing it. Talk to them if you want to know about it. And I think actually the heart of a successful meeting is moving those things that people need to be aware of, but don't need to discuss into a separate part of the agenda, so that you can use the bulk of the agenda for that valuable discussion that really brings together, you know, the strengths of your team. If you want, you can position it before the discussion or presentation items, but generally I prefer it at the end. Other business, it's good form to have that in a meeting. You know, it's taking advantage of the opportunity that you've got the people together, allow people to, you know, bring items here, time permitting, and discuss them. And then critically, at the end, summary of action items and next steps. Not the detail, but, you know, at minimum, like, what did we decide? And typically it would be the chair or the project manager that reads out their notes at this point and then says to the whole team, is there anything I've missed, or did anyone have a different understanding? So this is like the last checkpoint before you exit the meeting to make sure that you're all on the same page. This particular one has regular participants, guests, regrets, etc. So, yep, question? Yeah. Yeah.
How long would you typically say is effective for like a frequent meeting, like not a summit or not like a big, but like an hour, half an hour?
So I actually find it tough. It depends on what it is. This is a usual meeting for me would be, usually an hour. Occasionally 2 hours. It sort of depends on how hard it is to get the people together, but usually it would be 1 to 2 hours. Yeah, it depends on the team and what works for them. 1 hour is a good amount of time. If you find, here's one thing, if you progress through the agenda in 45 minutes, release people for sure. Like, don't, you know, maybe take advantage, maybe there's some side conversations that started, you can say you can continue them now if you like, but give people back that time. But I would say most of the meetings that I set up, if they're of this structure, are between 1 and 2 hours. And then the other thing would be almost the equivalent of like a smaller group meeting. It's like this issue or this opportunity came up, a subset of us are going to work on it. That can just be half an hour. You don't need an agenda for that. We know we're going to meet, we're going to discuss and come up with something. Yeah. So core team decisions. This is something that I like to put in because I find it's not often thought of well. You know, sometimes a grant application or project plan will say, well, who decides? The whole team decides. But some of these initiatives, as we know, you know, the whole team is like 35 people or something. So say, really? You know, what about those people that haven't been to a meeting in 3 months? Do they really have a say? You know, so the answer is usually they don't mean the whole team. Is it that the core team decides? And then you're going again, okay, really? Maybe it is the core team decides. But often it's the case that it's a subset of the core team, often the scientific leads, sometimes the administrative lead as well, who are really making decisions. And if yes, that's okay. You just want to be honest about it. Because if you're saying it's the whole core team and it's not possible to gather the whole core team together, you got a problem. The PI alone decides? Could be, but not great in that you're losing the benefit of the diversity of opinions you have around the table. So in practice, it's often the case that the PI plus 1 or 2 others decides. And you can call this the research executive, for example. And it can be a practical backup if the core team, even if you'd like to have the whole core team input, but you don't have time to bring them together. And sometimes for routine decisions, you may find that your whole team actually prefers this. So we've all probably been part of projects where we have a role, but not a leadership role. And then there's some decision that's being made by email. And the truth is, you don't know that much about it. It would be a lot of work for you to come up to speed, and there are other people better positioned to make that decision, and you're completely fine with it. So, so that's why this sort of subset research executive PI plus a few others is often the way to go. I do highlight when I say this that nothing prevents these 3 or 4 people from involving others, but it's really important to define up front what the minimum number of individuals, the minimum set of individuals who can make a valid decision is, because otherwise, you know, decisions can be made and people might after the fact say, well, you know, I didn't know, I assumed I'd be consulted. So right from the start, you say, this group of people will make these kinds of decisions. So a little bit about how decisions are made, and this goes to the point of, you know, what do you do? Always attempt consensus. So how do you get this? Well, you give notice, as much notice as you can, ideally 1 week or more. Make sure people have the materials so they're not being asked, you know, in the moment to make some big decision that they're not prepared to make. Strive to make decisions by consensus, and in the places I work in, I would say that to make a distinction between abstaining and expressing dissent, because sometimes we work with organizations who, for policy reasons, cannot indicate that they agree with a certain direction. But it's not that they're against it, it's just they're representing an organization that can't have that position. So strive for consensus, which means no dissent. But if you don't get it, you don't immediately move into like, okay, we're going to vote or we're going to do this. You explore, you know, where is that dissent coming from, and are there ways that we can bring in that differing perspective to change what it is that we're working on and ultimately have consensus on it. It says here in the time frame specified by the co-chairs or chair or whatever it is, it may be that you really don't have that much time. It might be like, well, we're going to try to work something up by tomorrow because we need a decision by tomorrow. But it is important, I think, to use the time allowed to explore where that dissent is coming from to see if you can get to a better decision. And then if you can't, escalate, which means you go to some higher authority. What that higher authority is varies by the project. It could be that we say the chair who knows the most about it, or the PI is going to be the one to decide. You may have an executive sponsor for your project. You may have a steering committee, you know, various things. But this idea of we're going to do our best to get to the point that we can make a decision, and if we can't, then we have somewhere to go. So that's one option. Another option you won't be surprised to hear is vote. You know, so these first are exactly the same. Yeah. 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 So a good process is the answer. If you follow a good process, if you truly use the time available to try to bring the dissenting input into it, and you still can't get to consensus, then you've right from the start said how things are going to go out. And I've been in that situation myself where I do not have the same view as the decision that's taken in the end. But as long as I feel that I've been heard, that there were some efforts made to take my input in, that's really all that anyone can ask. If a person really can't live with that, they're going to be a hard team member to have, right? They're essentially asking for a personal veto. If the majority or the higher authority or whatever it is really all think it should go in another direction, at some point you're sort of asking, you know, why is this person not okay with that? No one's saying that they have to think it's the best course of action, but if everyone else does, you know. So same 3 as before, but here, if consensus cannot be achieved within the time frame specified, the decision will be made if more than 50% of the members contributing to a quorum vote for it. So if we've got a team of 10 and 8 people are there and 5 people vote for it, we say we go ahead. We say to the 3 people who voted against it, we say we're sorry, but we'd said up front, this is how we're going to make decisions. We do need to make a decision. We hope that's okay. If there's a tie at that point, though, well, what do? We say, well, what about the members who couldn't make it today? You know, they're active in this project. They'll have some views within the time allowed. Let's see if we can check in with them and get their views on it. And if that still doesn't work, you got to go to a higher authority at that point. I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've ever been in this situation where even after voting, you have to escalate. Usually, you'll get a decision at that point. So what I'm talking about here really is governance, and I said I'd work this in, you know, sort of knowing a little bit about your backgrounds. So governance might seem like a bit of an intimidating term, but for me it's actually very simple. When you work in research and innovation, you actually know things are not going to go as planned. You can take that as a given. And so then the question is, okay, if it's not going to be according to the plan, who's going to change what and with what authority and how is that all going to work. And that's what governance means. It's just who has the decisions, who has the authority to make what decisions. Governance is more than just the list of people. Sometimes people think about it, well, who approves, who's got, you know, financial authority. It's about where do you get strategic oversight and advice for the project as well. And because it's got that strategic element, it's very different from the day-to-day decisions that a core team might make, which can also benefit from, you know, having defined decision-making processes, because it's meant to bring in that strategic external perspective. So this, we may have a bit of discussion about it, because I think what I'm sensing is in your community, people are using the term steering committee in a way that's different from what I would recommend. So a steering committee provides direction and in some cases makes decisions for a project. And so the way I think of a steering committee, it's like the equivalent of a board for your project. So in the same way that you have a CEO of an organization and they have an external board that provides advice, you know, the board doesn't get involved in every decision, but if there's a major strategic direction change, it's expected that the president would bring that to the board and get their advice. That's why the board exists. For that reason, the PI should not be the chair of the steering committee, which I gather might be common practice. You know, the PI can't be the chair of an external committee intended to provide objective advice from a distance any more than the president can be the chair of a board of a corporation. Advisory committees are different in that they don't provide direction, and frankly, your advisory committee can get different advice from different players, and that's just fine, right? You don't have to come to consensus if you're an advisory committee. An advisory committee may choose to, you know, come to consensus on a point or even vote on a point to, you know, provide, you know, clear advice to the PI and others, but it's not necessary. And then finally, scientific advisory committees are, you know, a special kind of advisory committee that in particular often include international members. It's you know, I'm sure most of us are familiar with having some of these in grant applications, et cetera. But what I don't see as much is that we're very clear in describing how these organizations are going to be contributing to the project. And so here are just some examples. Often include strategic oversight, which might, for example, including reviewing risks and potential opportunities. Often it's good to do this more frequently in the first and last years of a project, maybe twice a year in between. They can provide advice or direction on topics that the PI's or research team brings forward. So, you know, in the research team's own meetings, they might realize, you know, we're not certain about what to do about this. Maybe there's a new development. They're not certain whether they should change the plan and integrate it or proceed as per their original plan. And that's a great thing that a governance body can help with. And then sometimes they literally may not have the authority, the team may not have the authority to make a decision, in which case they need to go to a steering committee in particular to get that authority. So for example, a major financial change. So what would we have in terms of reference? Almost everything that I do, it's like 2 to 3 pages at the most. And these would be the typical sections I'd have in it. Background of the project and the purpose of the committee. So, you know, often this is how you recruit members to your committee. You create the terms of reference and show them what it's about. A little bit about the chair or chairs and membership. And a small point there, you know, in our worlds, we're often prompted to have co-chairs. If you have the choice, it's better to have a single chair, because with 2 people, you're always increasing risk. You can have either duplication of effort or things slipping through the cracks when you've got 2 people. So 1 person is always preferable if it's acceptable. And then sometimes you'd have information about how the members were selected, where you're going for diversity by discipline, diversity by geography, you know, how they came to be their skills-based committee, et cetera. Authority, what decisions can they make or not make? Are there any limits to what they can do? Quorum, how many of them have to be there for a decision to be valid? You know, if you have a committee of 15 and 3 people show up, is that enough? Probably not. Decision-making process, so you've got the option here of, you know, try for consensus and then escalate, or try for consensus and vote. And then you may also want to note certain decisions that could be made by the chair or a subset of the members under some circumstances. A commitment to keep a record of the decisions and action items, something about what the work commitment is. Is it a committee that meets quarterly, for example, for 3 hours, just so people know what they're getting into? The term might just be full length of project if it's for a research study. and then an appendix with a list of named members. And you generally want those at the back because sometimes those do change and you want the other stuff to stay as is. So usually your first order of business for one of these committees is that you review the draft terms of reference and confirm it, and then you know how you're operating. So what I thought we'd do now, yeah, let's do it, is just have a bit, like your thoughts about, like what are some tough decisions for the kinds of projects and studies you're involved in? Like what are the things that are hard when they come up? Yes, budget allocation. Yeah, always comes up. Other things that are tough?
Site we don't participate, or site not willing to recruit or whatever. When you have one particular site in a
Okay.
randomized trial.
Site in out decision kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Other things.
Well, tough decisions if you've been working with a certain group, like sort of a little bit like the site in out, but maybe it's like a consultant that's not coming with the quality of the product that
Yeah.
not, but you've sort of already been in, you sort of feel like, okay, we're in so far, and what do we do now?
Yeah. Performance issues. And one that comes up sometimes is like kick someone off the team, right? Like, what if, with all good intentions, a team was formed, maybe even, a co-PI was funded and they're just not producing, right? You can use nicer language. Other ones?
Well, you're just not meeting your, like, you're not meeting your timeline.
Yeah.
Things are not going well. Yeah, so tough decisions, I guess, about whether you're going to stop or.
Lead to. What's that? Absolutely, authorship, right? Yeah, 100%, yeah. Intellectual property. What percent to whom? So these are things that come up. Budget allocation, what I'll put here is like changes. Like you think you've got enough budget, you find out that you don't. You're basically going to be transferring some from someone to others. Yeah, yeah. Response to budget cut. Yeah, yeah. So what I would say here is the reason you do all this, it actually doesn't take this much time. Like once you've got your go-to terms of reference or your agreed on decision-making process for your team, once you have that, all of these become easier to manage. You will face tough decisions in your project, and it's very hard in that moment to have a process that everyone agrees to, because all processes have pros and cons. But if up front you say it's going to be escalate or it's going to be voting and you're going to allow time, you're much more likely to have a coherent team even after a tough decision is made. So I'm going to skip the break because it turns out we're a little compressed on time. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the FYI items and different particular kinds of them. So it is extremely inefficient. This is another pet peeve. It's like practically the worst thing you can do to just do the roundtable updates, right? And people do their stream of consciousness, and someone might talk for 7 minutes, and people are furiously taking notes. Yeah, I see the body language, right? It's crazy making. FYI items are so much better. People can read faster. They can speak. If it's an important update, you want it in writing. You don't want to count on someone, was that March 13th or 14th? It's ridiculous. And a particular kind of information, and I'm going to show you a way to present it that can be very helpful for core team meetings, are status updates. And like everything else, they're most effective when they're short. So here's my go-to status update, which has always the following categories. It starts with key milestones and accomplishments since whatever the last update is, just a few bullets, what have we done? Not into the weeds, keep it 1 page, 12-point font. What's the upcoming work? What are the key task deliverables and milestones before our next meeting? Are there any key risks to be managed? Has anything emerged that the whole team needs to know about? And then most importantly, are there any changes to scope, schedule, or budget since the last update? So that's page 1 of the 2-page status report. And page 2 is very simple. It's a Gantt chart done in Excel, and it's got this red line in it. And basically everything to the left of the red line reflects reality as of that point in time. And everything to the right of the red line is where you think things are going to go. So almost all of us, we have to do Gantt charts as part of a grant submission, but then sometimes those just get put aside and they're not really looked at again. This is a way of keeping yourself honest. You know, we thought we'd be at this point in the project by this date. Draw the red line's drawn as today. Did we really finish that according to our original Gantt? It would be done. If it's not done, you just change the shading to show that it's still in progress and put the new date in. I do, yeah. I make it in Excel because a lot of people don't have Microsoft Project and or they don't use it correctly. So by doing it in Excel, you've got something that's shareable, and then I just paste it in as a bitmap into a Word document. Reich? No, I'm not. Yeah. What is it?
It's a data management or it's project management software.
Yeah.
That we're just reviewing, and it's just so much more intuitive.
Yeah.
The Microsoft.
Yeah.
Project, and it's you can do multiple charts and spit out and pick out certain aspects.
Yeah.
And run a lot of reports with it if you want.
Yeah. So I'm actually, for me, Excel meets all my needs for this, including up to projects that run in the tens of millions of dollars. And the main reason is you can share it with people, it can be edited, etc. I have people, what are the two? Team Gantt looks the most promising of the other ones that I've seen, which is an online one. And one of the reasons I say that is, for me, for the work that we do, the true measure that we actually use is the half month. And it's the only one that I know of that will allow you to enter things in half months. Other things force you to specify, you know, days or weeks, for example. And you get into trouble because months have different numbers of weeks, and then you end up, you know, hard coding dates, etc. So you might want to check out Team Gantt. It might even be free. So ending your meeting. It's good practice to have other business, as we discussed. Somebody, the chair or the project manager, should do a roundup, like what did we decide, just restating it. Even if you've said it only 10 minutes ago, just make sure everybody's on exactly the same page. And then consider whether there's actual value in the time it would take to create minutes. I have never in my life gone back to minutes from, you know, a few months ago. I don't even know if I've gone back to minutes from the last meeting. I'm more likely to ask someone. And what I do instead, this is just a screenshot, but I take the agenda, which as you can see is structured exactly as said, and then always I just use bold blue italic font to show, you know, a few notes on there, and then identify action items in particular with highlighting. So then you have the key decisions, the key, you know, input points right there embedded in the agenda in context. You can usually do it in like half an hour or less, and it's actually much more effective than the pages and pages of minutes. You know what? Often, yeah. So I took grade 9 typing back in the day when it was like real typing and they wouldn't let you see your hand. So I know how to type. And so usually what I'll do is I'll be making some notes, and then I will have someone who assists me, who's actually the lead on it. But sometimes I'll do it myself. If it's like 80% of the way there, I'll just say, can you review this and, you know, proofread it and see if I've missed anything. And often we will send these out same day, if not next day, while people are actually still thinking about it. Before we move into some other tips and tricks, I just wanted to make the point, it goes back to sort of the core team and who's on the core team and who are the other players involved. The term I use is research project partners. So there's often these people who might be intensely involved for portions of the project, or they might have key roles or deliverables, but basically what I'm getting at is they're not involved in the same way that the core team is. It's not that, you know, daily to bi-weekly kind of involvement. So the key message here is don't treat them like a core team member. Don't, you know, invite them to all the core team members. I think about the meetings that they need to attend to, or portions of meetings that they should attend. And one of my, another pet peeve, for years I worked at the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and I'd be a knowledge user on lots of research projects and studies. And I'd get invited to these, you know, multi-day meetings. And the truth is, like, I'd have a little bit of input on like the Tuesday morning and then the Wednesday afternoon. And if you structure the agenda so that they can provide most of their input at one time, they're going to stay with your project much longer and have more valuable input than if you sort of have them just sitting in the room for some of the scientific discussion that they might not have a lot to add. This isn't saying, you know, if they want to be there, absolutely, they're welcome to be there. You can have, you know, an open door policy, but don't force them to be there for the whole thing to provide the contributions that they're best positioned to do. So a few more tips and tricks. Avoid roundtable updates. Consider the FYIs submitted in advance instead. And you can even let people add to them, right? You can send out your marked up agenda and say, look, if you've got additional FYIs, just put them in. That's fine. Avoid lengthy roundtable introductions. You know, sometimes, especially that first meeting, you can be like 30, 40 minutes in and you're still sort of going around the table, especially if the first person happens to say a lot and other people feel like they have to say a lot. Consider instead having people submit really short bios, you know, the 100, 200 word bio. And one thing I do like is for the very first meeting, you know, to give people a chance to get to know each other, instead of saying, well, like, I'm so-and-so and this is my title, ask them what their hopes are for the project, you know, give it that positive orientation, sort of see what's going to motivate people as well. Use the 2 hands raised when you have a point to make on that same thing that the speaker's talking about. So we've all been there, you know, someone makes a point and then like 5 speakers later, it's like, well, back to when you said this. And it's just, it's disruptive, it's hard to make sense of. So basically, if you were speaking and I had a point to make on that point, instead of doing this, I would go like this. And the chair would say, ah, you have a point on that same topic, and you can get all the input on the same topic at one time. This can be a little tougher to manage because sometimes what happens, like in the moment, 2 people start talking and, you know, it's great because they're there, they can maybe make a decision right there. But then it's like it's going on a little and other people are just kind of listening and now it's not productive for those people. So do give some leeway for that kind of thing to happen. But if it's more than a few minutes, just suggest that they move it offline. And if you can finish your meeting early, just say, well, you had this time booked here. You've got a time for the 2 of you to talk together, but not having everyone else just sitting and listening. And then facilitation techniques, which we're going to demonstrate in this last little section, are useful, particularly when you have diverse participants. Finally, have some fun. Like it should be, you should have some laughter in meetings, you should have some energy in meetings. If it's really just drudgery, no matter how well it's structured, people aren't going to want to go. So we're going to close with facilitated session. And facilitating and chairing are very, very different things. I spoke earlier about the chair being in a position of authority and people really counting on them to, you know, manage the process and manage challenging participants. But the facilitator, in contrast, they completely stay out of the content. So the chair is usually, you know, the expert, it's the PI. The facilitator only talks about the process because if the facilitator gets into the content, it can shut down other people who have content to contribute. So even something as simple as me saying, you know, that's a good point, you might be like, well, you didn't say that's a good point after, you know, what I said. And because the facilitators, you know, they're at the center of the room, it's unavoidable. They carry some authority. So you really want them just to completely stay out of the content and exclusively focus on a good process. These are some situations where facilitation can be very effective. You have diverse participants or unequal power levels, and you really do want to hear from others. So, you know, the ADM starts and makes a statement. You know, how likely is it that the person who's the junior policy analyst is going to be like, actually, I disagree. Not so likely, but facilitation can help bring out all that input. Some teams, and we come from people who have, you know, good critical thinking skills, but there can be this tendency to be like, I have an idea, and then you might say, oh, you know, someone else tried that, it didn't work, and then it's like, yeah, you know, blah, 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 blah. And so then, you know, after 5 minutes, you have one dead idea. And then it's like, I have another idea. And then you have, you know, 5 minutes later, you have 2 dead ideas. So if you want to exit, if your goal is generative work and brainstorming, facilitation can be a much better way to, you know, begin by having a large number of ideas. And then, yes, there are processes to hone it down to the very best ideas, but not sort of killing them one at a time. Facilitation can be great if it's the end of the project, so project closeout, and you want to do a lessons learned about, you know, what worked well, what didn't work well, what learnings you want to transfer. And then finally, if you're doing something like a stakeholder consultation, you've got a really large group, it's not practical clearly to go 1-1-1, but you also don't want people just sort of sitting there, right? You want it to be interactive and them to be engaged. So facilitation techniques help a lot with that. So some useful facilitation techniques for facilitated sessions, multi-voting. People, have you done dotmocracy? You're familiar with that? So there'll be some decision, and I would say you've got 5 dots, vote for whichever ones you want. You can put all 5 on one option, or you have to split them. You can have whatever rules you want. Or you can also just do it with a show of hands. You can just say to people, okay, everyone, you get to raise your hand 3 times, make a note of the numbers that you want to raise your hand for, and then just eyeballing it in the audience. You can say, oh, it looked like about half of you people chose that. So that can be a much faster way to bring multi-voting in. And that is, you know, we talked earlier about sort of notches on the dial. That's another way to bring that in. It's not a forced choice for one thing. You're allowing people to spread their votes around. Another technique that I learned years ago, which I really like, it's called I wish how to. I wish opens up that blue sky thinking, you know, about a better future. And how to is the more practical, like how to fix this, like sort of specific solution oriented. And the idea is you give people post-it notes. They write one I wish or how to related to the topic on a post-it note. And then you can do some grouping by themes, you know, combined with multi-voting, that kind of thing. Use of small groups to refine ideas before they're discussed by the large group. So if you've got, you know, 100 people and, you know, this person says something and this person says something, those are pretty raw thoughts. But if instead you say, you know, for 5 minutes, make some notes. Now in groups of 3, think of 3 points you'd like to share with the whole group. You're going to get better output out of those groups of 3 than you did out of the individuals, better and more thoughtful. We already talked about 2 hands raised when you got a point to make on that point that is under active discussion versus waiting. And then internet polling, and this is the last thing that we're going to do. It's really great. Like I'm using this much more than I would have thought. The tool that we're going to use at the very end here, I just was introduced to it not even a year ago at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, and I probably use it every week now. It's great because it provides an environment in which people can make anonymous suggestions, truly, right? You create a record of what everyone said in the moment in their own words. So probably we've been in situations where you've got a facilitator and they're trying hard to capture what someone's saying, but it's changing as the facilitator's writing it down, right? It's not exactly what the person said. Now you're capturing it in their own words, and you have a report generated immediately after. And it also is a way that you can have multiple people, not going around the room, that room of 100, one person speaking at a time. You can have everyone entering information all at the same time for everyone to see. So you can sort of get through a lot more material quickly. So what I wanted to do then at the very end is, let's go to this. And I don't know why that looks like this now. Here we go. So as a way to, you know, share your thoughts. Oh, you know what? This happens. As a way to share, you know, your own thoughts about this workshop and share them with me and share them with everyone. What I've said here is everyone can enter up to 3 personal key learnings from the course. And this technique, we're not going to go through the, you know, first individual and then the small groups, but this technique, as you'll see, is a way that you can sort of see other people's ideas and generate your own off of them. So if you weren't able to log in previously, you've got 2 options. One is to enter that in your browser. And the second is you start by texting to this number. Instead of a phone number, you text the word Alison, and then you text whatever your responses are. There you go. Okay, and these are always interesting. It's interesting for me too, as the facilitator of the workshop. Yeah. These are all great. So maybe while these continue to come in, we've got a couple minutes. Some questions came up during the session, but do people have other questions, or ideas they want to share with the group?
Question. So, from your perspective, is voting when there is no consensus better options than looking for an executive decision?
I would say
What would be the, I guess it depends on the context. Or...
Yeah. Yes, it depends on the context. So if it's really the case that you think, you know, an executive is likely to know what's the best thing to do after all the discussion has happened, because they've got more experience, more knowledge, then voting doesn't help you, right? Like that's when voting's not good, because you may have a situation where you've got like a team with a lot of people who don't have experience, and the truth is their votes shouldn't count as much. Like you want an input for them to have, you want an opportunity for them to have input in the process. If I had to choose though, if I was just starting off, I would generally put voting in. So most of my you know, advisory or steering committee or working groups terms of reference do have voting as the default. It says we'll go for consensus and then vote if we don't get it. So it might be that the core team honestly is the exception. Maybe core team escalate, and then most other things vote. Because most other things, you brought the people together because you really want something that reflects what most of them think, if I can put it that way. Yeah. I assume that's just someone joining the poll as opposed to me being a learning, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Feel free. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, right? Because the whole thing kind of relies on the chair's capabilities and the chair having authority. And even if you have good intentions, it's really hard for someone who's not the chair to bring things back on track. I mean, what I'd be inclined to do is to try to intervene if you see it happen with something that's positive but doesn't detract from the authority of the chair. So you might say, let's say you've got a good dialogue and then you've got two people who are being a bit disruptive and taking it in another direction. You could put up your hand and you could say, oh, you know what Sue was saying 5 minutes ago, I'd like to come back to that because I think that's our ticket to success here. You could try that kind of thing just as a participant. But beyond that, it's very hard for these things to succeed without a chair. I have seen it happen. Interestingly, this happened, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry when I first graduated, and sometimes they would have there, I don't see this as much in research, but they would have someone who actually wasn't the natural lead chair of the meeting, like almost like a hired chair kind of thing, like someone, almost like a facilitator, like someone who's just the process. And that I haven't ever seen it since. It was funny because it was one of the first things I was exposed to. And then I haven't seen it at all since. But maybe it's just that the person, like they're a very smart individual, but they're not a natural chair, and maybe someone else could actually sort of take over the process of the meeting while they still provide the overall leadership. And I'm not sure what to do here now, sorry. I think I think my computer, I'm not sure actually what happened, but no, I don't think it is I thought it was my computer, but it's not. It's okay, because we've been through the slides anyway. So maybe what I'll do is I can just, on my own screen here, recap the learning objectives, which I hope, oh, there they are. Look at that. Have been fulfilled. So by the end of the workshop, we did spend, especially in the first simulated meeting part, know, people are, I think, should be alert to the fact that as much as you're coming in with a plan for the meeting, not everyone's on the same page. Other things are going on personally and professionally. And so to have that successful meeting requires, you know, an active chair, because not everyone is coming to the meeting with the intent to address the objectives and purpose. You want a great thing to do is you can design an agenda that increases the likelihood that you'll get where you want to go by having, you know, stated objectives and enough time to discuss those things and come to the decisions you need to come. And then, but really it comes down to the chair and how you conduct effective meetings to keep things on track. And if you do all that, you can be like my daughter in Bolivia. You'll be like, yay, we have a meeting. Great things are going to come out of it. And that is the end of the workshop. So there you go. You got the gift of 7 minutes of free time. And I'm happy if people have sort of one-on-one questions or things they want to discuss. I'm happy to stay here for a few more minutes. Thank you all.